Introduce our second panel, beginning with Dr. Berhanu Nega, who is a Bucknell University Associate Professor of Economics. He is also current chairman of Gimbat 7, the Movement for Justice, Freedom, and Democracy. He is one of the leaders of the Coalition for Unity and Democracy, and served as campaign manager for the party's successful effort during the 2005 elections. He was first freely elected mayor of Addis in 2005 election, and along with all the leadership of the CUD, he served 21 months in prison after winning the election. I would note parenthetically that when Greg and I visited in 2005, Dr. Nega and Greg got in a car to go one place, I got in a car to go somewhere else, and right behind them, ubiquitous to the core, was a group of secret police who monitored every move that they made, and it was just telling. It was over the top. Dr. Peter Pham, again, welcome back, Dr. Pham, director of the Michael S. Ansari Africa Center at the Atlantic Council in Washington. He is incumbent vice president of the Association for the Study of Middle East and Africa, an academic organization that represents more than 1,000 scholars, and is editor-in-chief of the organization's Journal of the Middle East and Africa. Dr. Pham was the winner of the 2008 Nelson Mandela International Prize for African Security and Development. He has authored half a dozen books, chapters concerning Somali piracy, terrorism, and stabilizing fragile states, as well as more than 80 articles in various journals. We'll then hear from Mr. Obang Metho, Solidarity Movement for a New Ethiopia. Mr. Metho is the executive director of the Solidarity Movement for the New Ethiopia, a social justice movement of diverse interests. He is tirelessly advocated for human rights, justice, and freedom, the environment, and enhanced accountability in politics and peace in Africa for over 10 years. He has briefed and met with leaders and officials at the UN, European Parliament, State Department, U.S. Congress, and the World Bank, and the Council for Foreign Relations, among others. He defends the fundamental respect for human life and is committed to work for the reconciliation, forgiveness, and healings of affected people in order to create positive future. Then we'll hear from Mr. Adote Akwe, who is Amnesty International's Managing Director for Government Relations for AI International. He rejoined Amnesty in 2010 after serving as Senior Policy Advisor for CARE. In this capacity, Mr. Akwe helped develop and implement advocacy on CARE's priority issues towards the U.S. government. Before joining CARE, he worked with Amnesty International USA for 11 years. He also served as Africa's director for the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, now Human Rights First, and previously served as a research and human rights director for the American Committee on Africa and the Africa Fund. So, Dr. Nega, if you could begin.
Sorry. Good morning, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Bass, distinguished members of the House Subcommittee on Africa. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. It is indeed a great honor and privilege to have the opportunity to appear before you to discuss issues related to the future of democracy and human rights in Ethiopia. Democracy and human rights have direct implications for Ethiopia's survival as a nation. The existence of a democratically elected and accountable government that strictly adheres to the rule of law and respects the basic rights of its citizens is the only arrangement that will ensure Ethiopia's stability and prosperity in the long run. A stable and prosperous Ethiopia contributes to the prosperity and stability of the region. An unstable Ethiopia has the potential to destabilize the Horn of Africa. Issues ranging from religious extremism, potential conflict over freshwater usage, crippling poverty, and looming environmental challenges could threaten the livelihood of the people in the region, and such challenges require the attention and resources of the international community in partnership with responsible and accountable leaders in the region. It is therefore in the economic and national security interest of the US and its Western allies to ensure that Ethiopia achieves durable stability, which can only come from genuine democratization, rather than settle for a short-term, tenuous peace that is falsely projected by dictatorships and that could collapse with the slightest challenge from a fed-up and angry populace. Having said that as an introduction, let me quickly and directly address the topic at hand. There are three interrelated issues. The first deals with the government's observance of human rights and democratic principles after the days of Mallas. This is a topic that is least controversial, and I have addressed it in detail in the written testimony that I have submitted for record. Suffice it to say that in every major category of human rights and democratization, things are as bad as they were during Mallas' tenure, or even worse in some cases. Award-winning journalists are languishing in jail. Ethiopia is very close to Iran, Cuba, and Somalia in the number of journalists jailed or exiled. As a cruel reminder of the elections in communist Soviet Union, the ruling party allegedly won 99.6% of the parliamentary seats under Meles in 2010. As if to outdo Meles, in the most recent local elections, the ruling party and its allies won all of the 3.8 million seats. The Independent Election Commission called it a manifestation of the maturity of Ethiopian democracy. The government is simply allergic to the presence of independent civil organizations. It decides on who should be the leaders of religious institutions and has the audacity even to attempt to pressure Ethiopian Muslims to abandon their faith and convert to a new sect that it somehow favors. It purposely fosters conflict among different cultural and religious communities. Ethnic cleansing of the Amhara from the south and Benishangul regions, which started under Meles, hasn't stopped. The forced eviction of indigenous people from the Omo Valley and Gambella regions has intensified. The judiciary, like all state institutions, is completely captured to a point where the faith that people might have in finding justice through formal state institutions has been obliterated. Mr. Chairman, the potential for reforms under the current government, which forms the second part of this discussion, is at once very critical as well as potentially controversial because the discussion about the future by its very nature is speculative. In my mind, this issue has two parts. The first is my own assessment of the possibility of reform under the current regime. The second is a follow-up to the first. If there is no reforms, what is going to happen to Ethiopia in the future? Let me address both of these issues candidly. Much as I wish it, I don't see the possibility of an internally driven reform leading to a genuine democratic dispensation in Ethiopia. The ruling clique have committed too many human rights crimes, have accumulated too much wealth through rampant corruption, and have antagonized the population too much to feel that they can continue to enjoy a peaceful life after relinquishing power, which they know would happen if there was to be a truly free and fair election. Instead, they believe that they can somehow survive through total repression insofar as they can get the foreign aid resources as well as the diplomatic support they need to help them keep the lead on any potential resistance to their power. The only change that Meles' death has brought to this situation is that it has revealed the tenuous nature of this calculation as it has exposed the internal conflict and bickering within the ruling coalition. This takes me to the second part of the issue. So what is going to happen if there is no possibility of reform coming from the government? Will Ethiopians simply accept tyranny and live this humiliating existence indefinitely? If I know anything about the Ethiopian character, that is one bet I am not willing to take. That is why, unfortunately, my assessment is rather pessimistic. I think the government's capacity for total repression is going to be challenged rather dramatically in the near future. As the government simply refuses to reform, intensifies its repression, deliberately decimates the legal opposition, and continues to antagonize people in all parts of the country, armed resistance has become an acceptable form of struggle. The various armed groups have started to talk seriously about unifying their actions and their vision for a democratic future as the public's attention shifts from the peaceful opposition to the armed groups as their last best hope for ending their humiliation and freeing themselves from tyranny. Mr. Chairman, it is painful to see my country go through such turmoil in order to achieve the most basic rights that all people in this day and age routinely expect and deserve. I wish there could be a peaceful way out of this quagmire, but I feel that is unlikely. This has serious implications for U.S. foreign policy. The current policy of shoring up and bankrolling authoritarian rule with the hope that it could achieve a modicum of stability in the region is going to face a serious challenge. Will the U.S. and its allies continue to support a brutal regime that is sure to be unstable as the armed resistance against it intensifies? Will such support ensure the stability of the regime over the long run? If the opposition is committed to a pluralist, democratically elected government in Ethiopia, wouldn't it be better and more durable ally than the current regime? This takes me to my last point regarding what the U.S. can do to ensure reforms. If reform leading to genuine democratization is sought, clearly the policy followed by the U.S. and its allies in the past 21 years has not worked. The policy of constructive engagement, which hopes to cajole the government to implement some reforms in exchange for financial and diplomatic support, has simply failed to achieve its objective. Instead, the current policy might unwittingly increase instability in Ethiopia. On the other hand, there is a very strong argument, both on national security and humanitarian grounds, to keep the situation from deteriorating even further. Contrary to prevailing wisdom in the West, the Ethiopian government is amenable to pressure, especially financial pressure. A coordinated, no-nonsense financial pressure that conditions Western aid on clear, targeted, measurable, time-bound political reforms that could lead to a democratic dispensation is, in my view, the only mechanism that could avert the potential crisis that is looming in Ethiopia. Mr. Chairman, working towards such an outcome is not only the right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do. The world community has enough experience by now to know that doing nothing at the early stage of a crisis would lead to extremely costly later. A crisis is looming in Ethiopia. And if we act wisely now, we can avoid a lot of pain and suffering later. I hope the United States will play its part to bring about a peaceful and sustainable solution. Such an outcome is good for the international community, good for regional stability, and certainly good for Ethiopia. I know, Mr. Chairman, under your leadership, your committee in this House will do its part for the well-being of the Ethiopian people. Thank you very much.
Dr. Nega, thank you very much for your question. The meeting will be in order. Thank you. Mr. Pham, Professor Pham.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting us to come here, talking about Ethiopia. I would like my statement to be submitted in the record, and I think that speaker before me have already said a lot, and I will try to summarize. From what we heard, going back to the subject, see that Ethiopia after Mallas. I think we need to go back. What happened when Mallas was here? And I think that this is something that most of us need to be aware of. When Mallas was alive, or when he went to the bush, he went with an organization called Tigray Liberation Front to liberate a section of a country, not to liberate Ethiopia. And when they took over, they did not change it. They have created what they call EPRDF to fool the outsider that Ethiopians are unite while they're still running the ethnic base. I think this is something that we need to not to miss it. In Ethiopia, today, for the last 20 years, it's been led by ethnic base. And this is something that we should not miss. So when Mallas was alive, he was being known, and I think Yamamoto put it very well, charming to the West. Brutal to the Ethiopian. Saying that a lion war on terror is terrorizing his own peoples. Saying that economic growth is booming. Saying that economic growth booming. Just ask other Ethiopians who have been displaced from their land. Put hate has been used as a tools. The list can go on when Mallas was alive. Now let me come back. What has changed? Last time, and again, I thank you, Mr. Smith, for your extraordinary leadership. 8 years ago, when there was a briefing here, I came and testified. For 424 people from my own ethnic group from Gambela, for 193 Ethiopians who were killed, for the Ethiopian political prisoner, including Dr. Brown Nega, who is beside me. That was 8 years ago. Yamamoto was with me. He said there was a crossroad. 8 years, can you not cross this road? Yamamoto said that. Yamamoto claimed that by that time, Ethiopia, at the beginning of new chapters, this book, they've never any other chapters since then. The point I want to make is this. I agree with some of the peoples I disagree with some. The USAID talk about progress in Ethiopia, peace and reconciliation in Ethiopia. There's anti-terror laws. It is against the law for reconciliation, child right, woman right, disabled. The value that which really the Americans depend on. And we call that there's progress in the country. These are some of the issues that I want to mention. In my point, I am speaking as a human right, and I'm speaking as an Ethiopian, because if something is happening in Ethiopia, to the outside it's happened to Ethiopia, to me it's happened to my family member. And this is one point that I need to mention. One point that I need to not miss. In Ethiopia, the journalists are locked up in jail. In Ethiopia, what we need, the Ethiopian people, are simple things. We need to be giving a choice. All of you are sitting, Mr. Smith, some people, you are representing people. In Ethiopia, we are denied to have our own Smith that we chose. And that's what we are asking for, nothing less. In that matter, right now, Malaysia is gone, the regime is in place, but at the end of the day, the Ethiopian problem will not be solved by the outsiders, by the Ethiopian. We had many chances when the King Haile Selassie collapsed, we missed that opportunity. When the Derg collapsed, we missed that opportunity. At that time, there was a gentleman called Goswell in this house. The thing he predicts is what's going on today. Right now, Yamamoto may say that Ethiopia is a crossroads, but the Ethiopian is different. And I would like to now read a statement that I would like for all of us to know. The reason why I say that it's not an American, the simple thing that we are asking, we are not asking an American or a Western to free us. We are asking them not to be a roadblock to our freedom. We can free ourselves. And how do we do that? It's simple. For the last 12 months, the Ethiopian Muslim brothers was protesting just to choose the leaders who can preach them. The Ethiopian denied them, they've been protesting. Peacefully. The government wants to divide them and say that the Ethiopian Muslims are radical extremists. And I say they are not. The Muslim and as a Christian and Ethiopian, we don't share faith, we don't share land, we share blood. And the blood cannot be taken away from us. We are one people. The hope and the change I'm seeing, just a few weeks ago, the Blue Party have took the leadership to bring Ethiopian out. They called the people in Ethiopia show up. And before they show up, let me read a statement I got from one young man. Dear Obang, it is now just 4 hours before we go out to rallies. I don't know what will happen. This may be my last message. The last time I went out, 2005, with 3 of my friends, I was the only one came back. This time, I may not come back. I'm looking forward to this. It seems like going to war zone. The wholly different, the other side have gun, I have nothing. If they shoot, I have nothing else to deliver. This is the kind of country that we are living in, Obang. But I have more ground. And that's why I'm going out, and I'm not afraid, and I want somebody to know. This is the kind of government that the U.S. is funding. And this is the point that I just want to conclude. Mr. Smith, the Ethiopian, we are enough opportunity. We have enough money Ethiopian. What we need is to work together, people to people. And those people may not the one in others. The Ethiopian tax driver will pick you up. The Ethiopian who are working in Starbucks serving you coffee. The Ethiopian that are working at parking kid. The Ethiopian in DC, they want freedom like everybody else. We are not begging. When Obama ran for president, he said that we need change. Some Ethiopians who are working minimum wage, pay and hoping that they will hear from Obama. We never heard that. We are not disappointed. We will free ourselves. Thank you.
Mr. Mehta, thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Akwe.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Representative Bass, Amnesty International continues to look forward to working with you and to thank you for your leadership on behalf of the issues in Africa as well as on human rights. I'm going to be very, very brief because I know that we're running out of time. I think the panelists who spoke before me have already said that this is a window of opportunity and that it's closing fast. This is an opportunity not only for change in Ethiopia, but also for change here in Washington in terms of U.S. policy towards the country. What we have seen, not only in Ethiopia, but in other parts of the world, is that history shows that governments tend to harden as opposed to soften if they are not, if they do not seize the opportunity for reform at the beginning, at the start. And so I would urge that this committee and Congress push the administration to recalibrate and to revisit what it is exactly is going on in Ethiopia, what the government's genuine commitment in Ethiopia is to human rights and the rule of law, all of which are going to be critical and essential in terms of its future, whether it's a democracy or, as the first panelist said, whether it's the alternative future which nobody here wants. I would also say that there are many levers that the United States has not yet used in terms of its pressure of applying or challenging the Addis Ababa regime to meet its human rights obligations. For example, the Ethiopian government is a party to the ICCPR, to the Geneva Conventions, to the Convention Against Torture, to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. The Ethiopian government is also a party to the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance. All of these are very clear in what governments are supposed to do in terms of creating free and fair conditions and basic accountability by the ruling government to respect human rights and free expression. Despite that, and excuse me, the Ethiopian Constitution also has at least 30 human rights provisions in it that speak to fundamental freedoms and rights. Despite this, the litany of human rights concerns and abuses is sadly very depressing. And these are issues that are not only reported by Amnesty International, but by other human rights groups and the United States Department of State, which puts out its annual human rights report. Very specifically, issues of freedom of expression, crackdowns on human rights defenders, torture and ill treatment, which you mentioned earlier, the conflict in the Somali region, which my colleagues have also referred to, the issue of villagization. But the others are even more profound. For example, the lack of effective institutions. The Ethiopian judiciary continues to lack independence and resources, and as has been illustrated in recent trials, is not yet a guarantor of rights or justice for the Ethiopian people. The National Human Rights Commission is also severely lacking independence. Amnesty International believes that political will is the biggest obstacle to effective, independent human rights and democratic institutions, and while the current political mind frame of the government remains unchanged, it will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for effective institutions to exist and to operate. The final human rights concern that I would like to raise, obviously, is the precedent. And that has already been discussed, the 2005 elections and the crackdown that happened afterwards. Those are not things that were ever accounted for. The numbers were never fully clarified, and certainly there was never accountability. Those are things that this government still is accountable for and has to answer to. I would just go finally to close to just try and remember that we're dealing with human beings and individuals, lots of them, but indeed precious in their individuality. Eskinder Nega, Debebe Eshetu, Yusef Getchu, Akmel Negash, Ishak Eshetu, Tesabagan Desalian. All of these are just a few of the names of Ethiopian heroes who are challenging and fighting for individual rights and the rule of law in their country, who have suffered the brunt of the government's crackdown and its repression. There are thousands more like them, and some of them we don't even have the names on. Mr. Chairman, we believe that without the full enjoyment of human rights by all Ethiopians, it will be hard to see how the country will fulfill the promise of individual freedom and dignity that it has claimed to espouse since the ouster of Mengistu in 1991. Since 2005, the human rights situation in the country has deteriorated further with significantly increased restrictions on freedom of association, expression, and other rights. as I said, and as Chairman Smith also noted, this has not happened in a vacuum, and the international community is also in need of looking deeply into its policies and changing them. The failure to speak out and press for change by the Ethiopian government is critical, and it has allowed Ethiopia to set a dangerous example for other governments in the region and has kept the Ethiopian people themselves at risk of human rights violations and repressive governance. We hope that the President will speak to some of these issues on his upcoming trip to the continent, in particular the issue of civil society and the important and legitimate role that it plays in a healthy democracy and in the enjoyment of human rights by citizens and peoples in a particular country. But we also hope that the discussion of legislation and of policies that are being conducted by the Meles regime, by the post-Meles regime, including the Anti-Terrorism Proclamation, the Charities and Societies Proclamation, and other laws, will also continue to be raised not only by Congress, but also by the administration. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for testimony. I regret that there are a series of votes that will take about an hour, so I'll be very brief. If anyone would like to stay, I'll be back in an hour, but I know that's presuming on your time. And as